Welcome back to episode 2 of our green sculpting series, and in this episode we're going to look at tiers or plateaus, depending on how you want to talk about them, as well as some things that you might do to vary that. Just move this green so we've got some pins in some interesting places. Might just have to delete that one. So what we're going to look at first of all is, let's say, how to do a tier, when it's effective, and what alternatives there are. Now I'm going to say first of all, I think tiers are overused generally. What a tier is doing essentially is challenging club distance selection. So have you got the right club off the tee? Can be really good for a par 3. But I find because if you haven't got exactly the right club, you're rolling back and you're basically two putting. What I will say is that generally those putts, let's say I've landed here and the pin is here, well, it's not the most interesting of putts, is it? I've got no chance of making it. I'm basically just trying to get distance control right on the putt. Now that's not to say you shouldn't ever use these, but it's not the most interesting question that you could ask. That said, where should you be using this? On what sort of a hole? Well, generally you can use it in a couple of ways. You can do it on a wedge hole to make sure that the person gets exactly the right club. So if we look at 11, there's a couple of little tiers here, so you've basically got one here, you've basically got one here. So this is kind of like a 3-tiered green, but we'll talk a little bit more about what I've done to try to make this a bit more interesting in a second. What I think you can do when you have tiers is also, that does make them more interesting, is can you use them as a backstop, particularly if you make them quite shallow tiers. So you can see you wouldn't put a pin on this, but putting a pin at the bottom means that apart from here, that's going to be really treacherous because we're just tapping it down and hoping it doesn't miss. And I quite like on a short par 3 this sort of feast or famine, in that you could be just up here and have it funnel down, or you can go slightly too far and leave yourself with a 3-putt. And I think that's really fun in terms of encouraging absolute precision and just goading people to try to gamble on using that slope to bring it really close. So it can work really well from that point of view. It can also work quite well on a long par 4. So I think I have one right at the back here on 18, where it's really just pushing people to hit that one extra club and potentially bring danger off the back into play. Whereas you can leave it short and you're going to have an uphill putt, but if you want to get it close, you have to be really precise. Now, this is a very small tier because it's a very long approach shot, and what we're trying to do here is just reward the outstanding shot that gets close, whilst saying to good shots, yep, you can just settle for a kind of 2 putts and be happy. And on 18 I'm okay with that. So why do I not like tiers? Personally, I just think it's a bit all or nothing. Generally, I'll still work off them, but I think if we're just saying, let's take this one for example, and no matter where you leave it, it's like, I don't know, let's say we did that. It's literally just perfect club or bust, and if not, you've got a relatively boring putt up a hill. And I think a lot of greens that I see are generally designed around, well, I can put one tier here and a pin on that, tier here and a pin on that, and 2 others and call it a day. Now, what should you do instead? Not necessarily a should, because tiers can be good, like I say, for getting club selection right. Long par 3s, they can work really nicely. What I would suggest you try to do is, this is worked off, as you can see the tier used to be here. Take your flatten tool and just put it on the fuzzy tip brush setting and just try to flatten out the slope on one side, and you'll end up with what I'd term as a little half tier. And this is something where, okay, it's still on a tier, you've got a gradual slope this way, but an average shot is going to get incrementally better. So the amount, let's say we hit, I don't know, let's give this approach shot like 8 out of 10, and it comes to rest here, whereas a 9 out of 10 might come to rest here, and a 10 out of 10 here, and a 7 out of 10 here. Like, you're rewarding the player progressively. Whereas when we had that tier, let's go back to that and you'll see roughly what we were looking at. Well, I've forgotten to put the measure tools on. What we're basically saying with a tier is it's kind of all or nothing, like the 7 out of 10 and the 6 out of 10 and the 8 out of 10. Like imagine if this is all red slope here, let's say. Well, what we're basically saying is if it's not perfect, it's not getting close. And all of your shots, let's imagine this is a bit more severe, but no matter whether they're good or unless they're great, they're not getting close. So I think flattening out those one side of the tier, and it's your choice, but I think it lends to more interesting green slopes. What it also lends you is another area you can place a pin on. So let's say we flatten this one out just with 2 clicks. Well, suddenly we've got a pin here and a pin here that we could put that's maybe really challenging this bunker. So we've actually gained options on the green by taking away one of those slopes. Now, how would I go about forming a tier? Well, I tend to do it to start off with anyway, although I will usually work off the land with what greens I'm given. You can use any of these kind of fuzzier brushes, and you want one that's got the kind of blank space in the middle, and to raise that up as best you can. I generally advanced edit these. There is nothing worse than seeing a tier that is like this, where it's very, we see this a painful amount, where it's very clear which brush someone has used and they haven't thought about why they're using it, and the fact that it's right near the edge means shots are running away as well. If you are having a tier, please don't have it run away on all sides unless it's like an inverted thumbprint on a par 3 that's short. There's no reason to. So I would generally make it off the edge of the green where possible. So something like this. I quite like this brush because I think you get some it's not necessarily going in a dead straight line with the tier. Let's say we make it up, I don't know, 6 inches or so. Bear in mind we're already adding to an existing tier, and you can kind of see where it's coming, and that tier it's now given us is around here. So that's initially got some more interest. Look at last episode on angles. Well, because there's more space short than there is coming in from the right, I would want to be coming in more from this side of the fairway if I were attacking that pin than if I were coming in this side. I'm cutting across that tier more. Going to be a more difficult shot. So that would be how I do it originally, but your work's not done there. You then want to take raise brushes or flatten brushes. Generally on greens, I'm going to prefer raise. I think you get a bit more control. Flatten will tend to wash out your interesting slopes. Now, it depends how severe you want these slopes to be. At the moment, I wouldn't like that this is like almost a shot that ends up right here, could be running all the way off. It's these little bits of yellow I don't love. So I might take this up to 2 inches or so and just click and drag. And as you can see, that's just making the top of the slope a little bit steeper. So once it hits the slope, it will run down pretty quickly. But there's less chance of, if you've hit the tier, you should probably be staying on the tier. There's another way of doing this. You can take flatten. I mean, as always, look at what the brush is doing. So as you can see the land here, the more we're widening out, the more that's pulling up and that's pulling down, kind of as you'd expect. So you can hit flatten and just raise it up a little bit. That can work pretty nicely as well, in terms of ensuring that if you're on that tier, you should stay there. The same is true for the bottom. If you want to make it a steeper slope, or just lower the bottom of it a bit more. And that then means that this is now a really severe tier. The final thing I'll talk about on sculpting, a personal pet hatred though, because I don't think it's realistic, and we see a lot, is people tucking pins very close to tiers. Like, it's legal, but it's a stupid pin position, because if you end up here, you've got all sorts of awkward putts, and it's just like, put it here. It's going to get all the benefits of being close to that backstop, but you don't want to end up just at the foot of the backstop and suddenly have a putt that's breaking like 3 ways because it's right on this very steep slope. The final one that I really think is overdone. We will have tiers that suddenly just like go dead flat, giant slope, dead flat, and like it's almost, I suspect, as if someone has taken this brush at the bottom of the tier and just gone, well, I need to put a pin really close to it, so let's just flatten this right out. Because look at how this is, like it's going really downhill and then suddenly nothing. That's not how it works. You want some sort of gradation of colour, so you can see it going from red to amber. Now you might not want that yellow leaking in all the way from here, but you do want that slope to begin and end relatively naturally. So those are my thoughts on tiers. Generally, I would use them as a starting point for a green and then work off them. I think you end up with more interesting greens with half tiers and flatter areas and all of those sorts of things. But you can see on pretty much most of my greens where I've started or where they're added. So there's one here, 11 we'd already covered, 12, actually it's kind of middle, so that area. There won't be one on 13. On 15 you've got a little half tier there and a little one here. So you can see this bit's been flattened out compared to the really steep slope this side and the really steep slope this side. So that's a rough insight into tiers, how to do them, and kind of just generally what I think of them. I hope that's useful. I'm not saying don't do them, I'm just saying think about when you are doing them, and when you are doing them, I guess what's the aim of doing so. I hope this was helpful, and see you next time.